All right,
You've got
welcome.
2 exclamation points on the.
I
on
do.
there.
I'm excited about this interview.
All right.
Lito, welcome to The Orbit.
Thank you.
It's an ongoing interview series where we interview just a lot of solo-run business owners,
Right.
a lot of them young, but really it's just interesting people who are interested in things.
Cool.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Right. For work, I am a programmer, and I also teach programming. For fun, I draw and do a lot of calligraphy, and very interested in what makes art good generally.
Nice.
Kind of.
I like that because there's the hard technical skills of computer stuff.
Right.
And then you're in the back of your brain, it's like, what is art?
Yeah.
Which kind of leads us to what we're here to talk about today,
Right.
which is Christopher Alexander, who I think you maybe told me about initially.
Oh, that's good.
Which
Okay.
I think is very exciting. Can you tell me a little bit about Christopher Alexander and how you became interested in him?
Right. Christopher Alexander was an architect working from the 60s onward. He built the famous Alice Waters restaurant in the Bay Area, I think.
No way!
Yeah.
The one in Berkeley?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
Chez Panisse.
Yeah. He designed Chez Panisse, and also whichever of the universities is in Eugene, Oregon. University of Oregon, I think.
Right. I think
That's the one. Yeah. Very interested in what makes buildings good, and wrote a lot about how to design things well in a formal way. In particular, he didn't have a lot of respect for formal architecture. He thought that most of the buildings that were being produced at the time felt not relevant to humans, and really wanted to center actual people and the way people live and do things in his work.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of a relationship to programming somehow, and it's almost
Right.
manufactured.
Right. Programmers try to apply Christopher Alexander's work to their own work, and I think there is room, because Christopher Alexander is writing about design, and design in the sense of resolving the different forces. You're making a created object that fits into some context. And I think in that sense, programming is also doing that. You're making a designed object that should run on a computer and resolve some problem that you have.
Right.
But also, a lot of the way Christopher Alexander gets applied to programming feels very artificial.
Because that's not what he was
force.
writing about.
No, he was not writing about programming at all, and people have tried to apply it to programming,
Right.
and it doesn't fit, I think. So
what led you to Christopher Alexander?
a recommendation from my friend Nico,
Okay.
who told me about a book, The Timeless Way of Building, which you've read now.
Right. And are you applying, then if not computer programming, what are you applying it? Just general design thinking?
Yeah, how to
Okay.
think about making things.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a very good general
Right.
way to how to apply this.
Yeah.
Cool. So, Timeless Way of Building, I read it.
Right.
And what the things I like about it is it's very poetic
It
and
is.
very spiritual.
It's making an emotional argument, not a logical one, which I think is very effective.
I think it's super effective as well.
Yeah.
All of my reading is just really thoughtful people that make the emotional argument.
Right.
So I loved that.
Right.
It took him 14 years to write?
Something like that, yeah.
A very long time.
Yeah.
And it is also, as of today, a $65 book new.
Yeah, still in print.
That's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
So when you read it,
Right.
what was your takeaway? Or why did it come up with you and Nico?
Right. I don't remember why it came up
Okay.
with me and Nico at all. There's a lot to think about in that book, I would say.
Yeah.
The thing I kind of came to talk about was this book, the thing he wrote before, because it's way more digestible. I don't know.
Okay.
I feel like The Timeless Way of Building has in it each heading as a little piece of italicized text. And Christopher Alexander himself says, if you don't have time to read this whole book, just read these headings and you'll get the main point.
Good design.
Which I think has good design. It's too clever. It's gross. But I think that there's a lot in that book that it's hard to talk about. He's just making a case for self-organizing environments that people make themselves to make things right for the space that they're in.
Right.
That's how I describe it. But there's so much there. I don't know if I could summarize it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
So that after reading that,
Right.
it led you to this.
Led me to this earlier work, which is him trying to make kind of the same argument in a formal, mathematized way, which is interesting coming at it from a different direction.
I'm like scared.
I don't think it's successful.
Oh, okay.
I mean, because he's trying to talk about what makes people feel good
In a mathematical way.
Right. It worked and obviously led him to the timeless way of building later. You know, it's part of that. But it's also much more digestible and much more applicable, I guess that makes sense. The timeless way of building is about art, right? Like developing skills over time that
Right.
will let you apply. And this is like a formal method for designing.
So if it's more applicable,
Right.
what are you applying it to? Or like, tell me about your relationship with this book.
So this book is about how hard it is to design things that fit their environment well. And he describes a method for doing that. And I've been trying to apply, like when I make something, try to figure out what are the actual design elements that need to go into it. And one thing he says is how difficult it is to figure out what things are actually connected to each other. Like
You were talking about a teapot.
Right. He keeps using the example of a kettle.
Okay.
And like making a good kettle depends on many things. And we talk about them with human words that may or may not relate to the actual nature of the thing.
Yeah, the kettleness.
Right. Or like we talk about like economics in terms of how much does this kettle cost. And the things that you change about the kettle will change how much it costs or how economical it is to make, but maybe in a difficult to understand way. Different materials will change the cost, different sizes may change the cost. All of these things are complexly interrelated. Some things have like negative feedback on each other. If you make the kettle larger and you have the requirements, it must hold enough water and also must not take up too much space. Like you change one thing and
It'll
these
negatively
two, yeah.
impact the other.
Some things are
it's
like
a math balance.
right, it is, and he kind of ends up describing what programmers call a constraint-solving system. Of like figure out. He actually in the back of this book writes down exhaustively every possible thing that is interrelated and numbers them.
In the book?
For one design example, like how to design a particular village.
I want to make a
place.
mind map of this.
Right. And he just writes down every single thing he can think of that's a requirement. And then, after that, writes down every relation of them and how they affect each other.
He's showing me a page of numbers.
Yeah. It's
right now.
Right.
That's exhaustive, but also
It is.
very satisfying to look at.
Right. Right. This seems so... I mean, maybe I should, actually do the thing and try it, but it seems so exhausting that I have not written out every single thing when I'm trying to make something. I don't know.
When you say you're trying to make something,
Right.
What are you making?
Different pieces of art, I guess.
Okay.
Different... I don't know how to describe the things.
Right, because you just make a lot of different art.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
fair. Because I know it's very general, as this concept is very general. I think I'm just trying to find examples.
You got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is useful to know.
Yes, I hope.
Right. So more digestible, more applicable because
Right.
it has more tangible
Right.
theorems.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Very
It's
cool.
Very concrete.
So walking away from it, has it improved your ability to make art?
I think we'll find out in the long term.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, yeah, we'll see.
Cool.
I like the way I think about things better now, having read this book, but I don't know if that actually is going to lead to a tangible,
fruitful
yeah,
use. I
we'll
think
find out.
in reading The Timeless Way of Building,
Right.
one of the things that he's trying to produce is this quality without a name.
Right.
Which is when you walk into a space, for example,
Right.
and it's just good.
Right. It makes you feel more yourself.
Great. Yeah. For example, I always use this example: Courier Coffee, Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
That place has, for me,
Yeah.
the quality without a name, where everything, as in Christopher Alexander's word, every fixture, every element of the space has a purpose and life to it.
Yes.
What would be an example of something that doesn't have that?
Christopher Alexander loves to talk about buildings and like a high school.
Yeah,
you know,
because it's an institutional place that is built with squares.
A long dark hallway, light only at one end, a door at the other end. You know,
the worst place ever.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
So that would be an example of poor design and very little life.
And Christopher Alexander's later work is trying to find like what makes it feel this way in particular, and just naming everything. And like his favorite one to talk about as an example is like rooms should have light on two different sides. Like doesn't have to be opposite sides, but like have windows on two of the walls of a room. And if you do that, if you have a larger room, it will feel better. Just like there's no word to describe it necessarily. You'll just feel more at home there. And he's trying to just name a pattern language, which is one of his later books he wrote After a Timeless Way. It's just about naming every single one of those he can think of.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me because he's trying to use language to capture the ineffable.
Yeah.
Which is probably why it's so poetic.
Yeah.
Reading this as normal people, I think one of the main things, like once I finished reading A Timeless Way of Building, I was like, I need to get a comfy chair and put it by the window to read.
Right.
That makes sense.
Right.
So as far as like just an interior design perspective, that's probably the most reasonable approach.
Right.
However, because he also lists the elements of like a functioning town, it changes the way I look at cities too. Because it kind of separates me to like look down on the streets and see like which parts of this work.
Right.
Which I think is also interesting.
And it kind of empowers us as people to just like think about the spaces we have control over and try to just subtly make them better in the ways we can. Like we can't move a street, right?
We don't have the power to.
Right, but we can notice and like see the environment and the context and the things we do have control over, be like, well, I know since like the space I'm in is like this, here are the ways I can change it to make it suit me better.
Which is design.
Right.
I think it was Nico was saying like the rule of design is just like making things feel better.
Yeah.
Which is the whole thesis.
Right.
Christopher Alexander also developed this concept called pattern languages as well.
Right.
Do you want to talk about this?
Sure. His thinking on pattern languages is something that I think comes up with a lot of people who talk about art, which is like the language of things you know to express. Does that make sense? I don't know, that might be too abstract, but like in a drawing, be it literal iconography or what technique do you have that makes a thing feel a way?
Elements.
Right. And they range from broad and compositional to like infinitely small to the quality of a line or something like that. And that artist's language is something we build up over time and acquire just by practice or by instruction. Christopher Alexander...
Or culture.
Or culture. Christopher Alexander really advocates for the way of learning, which is learn by being corrected instead of learning by formal rules. Like, when you learn drawing often, you just do it a lot and are instructed by being like, no, try again. Like, no, try again. And there's no like formal rule of like, you must do it this way. Because once you have that, it cuts off a lot of the avenues for, interesting things you might want to explore. On the other hand, if you're learning to like be a lifeguard or something, you don't have the advantage of being able to do it by trial and error until you figure out how to be good.
Right. Exactly. Formal
you have
sets
to
of
have
rules.
a rule that you follow, and it's reduces the sort of art space of that, but it's good. That's good.
For me, that's like blogging. I'm going through this like immediately. As far as maybe blogging is not a good example. I think the rationale is that that's an art that I'm continuously refining the process. I'm thinking about pattern language in terms of that. Christopher Alexander says that all the things we make are directly influenced by the language that we have to describe them, which is super cool as a writer. I think a lot of people talk about how if you learn a lot of languages when you're young, your capacity for thought is also expanded.
That's a
theory.
Sapir-Whorf hypothesis,
Yeah.
right? And I don't know if that's true.
Fair.
Right.
But
it's a fun idea.
The idea is our capability of speaking about things will shape the things that we make.
Right.
So perhaps what he's doing in these books is, the reason there's such extensive lists is that then you can identify and change them.
That's exactly what he's doing. And in fact, in the appendix of this book, or in the afterword, that's literally what he says that he is trying to do. So you nailed it.
Woo!
He's just like he's like, I've written this book to demonstrate that the way in which you make a thing influences the thing that is made, and you must make a thing in a good way for it to be good. And you do that by having the language enough to think about it correctly.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And it makes me realize the importance of, honestly, poetry.
Yeah.
I think that poetry is having a moment right now. It's one of the best-selling genres of literature today, which is pretty cool. Part of it's Instagram. But it is also the art of distilling communication down to its most effective form. It's the most profound result for a distilled collection of words.
Sure.
Which relates, if we then have that ability to accurately describe the things that we're talking about, our capacity to build better things improves.
Yeah.
Which I think
Christopher Alexander would like that a lot.
So I've talked a little bit about how I've been using this. What do you hope to use it, or how have you implemented what you've been reading?
I want to be able to think better about things that I make. Like if I make a piece of art, I want to be able to know. It's such a squishy thing.
Yeah, you're drawing.
Right, yeah. Drawing or making like computer art, things that change over time, like
the magnolia.
The magnolias.
Lito's making basically a simulated magnolia.
Right.
That you click into a page, and depending on the weather, it will be blooming or not.
Right. It will. It knows the weather in Seattle, or at least in SeaTac, which is not always the same as outside. And it'll tell you the weather, and also if it's been warm enough, the magnolia will start to bloom eventually in the spring. And it's started to bloom right now.
And so,
anyway, I want to be able to identify what makes this feel good. Like, why have I done this, and what can I do to make it better and like more effective. And we were talking earlier about how like Nico looked at that and immediately saw the perfect thing to do, which in this case was make the page automatically update instead of having to refresh. And it just makes, like, that one thing makes it feel more magical and more alive. And I want to know how to do that also.
Yeah.
I want to know how to find that and think about the actual thing that I'm making, why it's good, and how to make it better.
Do you have any like examples of something you've seen and you're like, this does it?
I feel like that's a question I'd have to think about for a long time. I'd have to like reach back into all of the art
things that are well executed. Because
right.
My go-to is Courier Coffee, because I think that space is really well done. It does depend, because you just have to go through like the mental spaces of all the art you consume.
Especially because there's so many different pieces of art that people like, and it's hard. Each person who has made this art has independently like come up with a set of things they want to present and like resolved it in a unique way. And so you have to like look at someone's entire art catalog and figure out what it is they're doing and why it's effective, and then hopefully steal that for yourself.
Right. Identify it.
Yeah.
So for the viewer,
right.
If the viewer was get some like tangible use out of all of this design information, The rule is basically sit down and try to make a list of all of the elements of what you're trying to create.
The thing that's been most important for me is the way Christopher Alexander in this book thinks about form versus the context the form lives in.
Okay.
Like, you're making a kettle. He loves that example.
It's like in Timeless Way of Building, he loves barns.
Right. He loves talking about how people build
It's good
barns.
teaching.
It's good. Useful, you know?
Mm-hmm.
What determines a good kettle is different from one place to the next, one context to the next. Like, if you have a tiny kitchen, like I live in a very small space, having a big water heater is probably bad. It's taking up space that could be better used for something else. Whereas if you're in an industrial kitchen, you need your kettle to dispense hot water immediately, and it doesn't really, depends, but it might not matter how much space it takes up.
Right.
And so where do you form the boundary between the thing that you're making and the space? Like, maybe you could just like clear off some more counter space, and that would be an adequate design solution. And it's a malleable boundary. And I think thinking about that has made me a lot more conscious of what it is I'm making and given me a broader space of how to solve different design problems. And so Christopher Alexander talks about the thing that we're designing is a good fit for the context that you have. And so try to determine your context concretely as best you can.
Yeah, the frame.
Right, the frame. And be as broad as you like step outside the form you're making to see if you can resolve things in a different way. And then once you know the exact context, you'll be way better equipped to know what your actual problem is and know the thing you're trying to make. If I say make a kettle, that's not enough actual information to build a thing that's good. Like down to, in different countries, people use different kettles because the voltage of the power mains is different.
Right.
Not
about a problem that we have here.
Not a problem we have here. We just do whatever.
Yeah.
People don't care, I guess. But like in the UK, they have 200 plus volts in the power main. And so when you put the kettle on, there's a ton of power just going into the water, and it heats up and it's fine. Whereas in Japan, it's 120 volt power mains. And so you, instead of putting the kettle on, because that would take a long time, if you need hot water, you have a reservoir of hot water that's kept hot. Like, different contexts need different solutions. So know your context and know your form. It's the most effective advice.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
And design is fun because I think a lot of people are looking for things that feel good, especially in like UX shit.
Sure, yeah. I don't know, it's broadly applicable. Just like one of the best things we can do as people, I feel like, is make the spaces around us just better.
Yeah.
As best we
can.
And
that's the takeaway.
Yeah.
Now that you've finished this,
yes,
where are you headed next in your like personal reading or
the
interests?
thing I want to do is take a couple of artists that I really love and try to figure out the things that make their art good in this kind of formal, mathematical way.
That's very exciting.
That's not the sum of their art. Like, you can't actually understand what a person is doing, I don't think, by diagramming the specific techniques that they've used.
But it might give you language.
I want to learn about it,
yeah.
right? Like, there might be something there. I want to try.
What artists?
I haven't decided yet.
Okay.
I'll let you know when I have a list.
Yeah.
2 or 3 artists. Thinking Klimt is going to be one of them. Gustav Klimt.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about authors, for example.
Right. This is like Andres Thompson, I think it was.
Okay.
Typing out the contents of The Great Gatsby, just
right.
to see,
what went into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I think maybe that's what I'm doing with all my like Joey Ito fandom as well. It's because I'm like, here's someone who has a lot of information and is executing it in a very good way. So I'm just consuming all of the parts that have made him who he is in order to fully understand his process, his thought process,
right?
His form, as it were.
It's the classic joke, like, what should I do? Well, just choose the thing that a person smarter than me would do and do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Man, that's awesome. We have about 5 minutes left.
Cool, that flew by.
It did. I think that concludes it. Do you have anything else that you'd want to explore?
I think we hit all the points that I'd sort of mentally made a list on.
We did it very efficient way.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been The Orbit. If you're interested in books, you're in the right place. And we'll see you next week for another interview. Thanks for joining us, Lito.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.